All right, we're live. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position. All right, we're live. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position. One of these days I'll do that without doing that.
Probably not, but we'll still love it.
All right. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Firearms Radio Network and or their employers. Viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on live shows. And we're going to give a big shout out to JCAA once again. Judson, how many rounds of JCAA have you shot? And what are your thoughts on that stuff, man?
Like in total?
Yeah, last week.
Oh, last week. We probably went through, I was on the range with Sean Heron. We like shooting. And Nick Dunstan, we like shooting. And we probably went through, we were doing long range stuff. So we weren't doing a ton of pistol work. We were trying to get out to about 1,000 and the wind just was not happening. We had like 50 or 60 mile an hour gusts. So we said, screw this, we're going over to the pistol pit. And total for the day, we probably sent, I don't know, 500 or 600 rounds, which is not a ton in my opinion, but if we want to talk about lifetime, we can get up into the 30, 40,000 rounds of JCAA and cleanest stuff I've ever shot.
Yeah, that's what I like about it. I don't clean my guns nearly enough as I should, or I tell people they should. So I think if I switched over that stuff, man, I'd have to clean even less. Let's get into the show, though. Andy, before we do that, Andy, what's on your head?
Oh, you like my new gear?
I love it.
Nice, right? So a little bit of a story on this. Actually, I started with a new stand and everything. I'm getting fancy now. But at the inter-annual meeting, I was talking to the account executive for 3M, aka Peltor, Joanne Reeder, and I was telling her I had an issue with some Peltor ear pro. Wow, I got to spit that out. Some ear pro that I was having issue with. That after a while they just started fading as far as the speakers and how they were working. And she offered to replace them for me for free. So I got these in the mail here a couple days ago. These are the upgraded ones. They have Bluetooth connection. And so I'm going to try them out today in our podcast and then get them out to the range. So I want to say thanks to Joanne Reeder. Hopefully I'm saying your last name correctly, from Peltor, who gave me these.
Awesome. Sounds good. I'm looking forward to getting your feedback on that. I'm probably going to be switching over some ear pros myself. Tonight, we're joined by Rob Pincus of ICE Training Company and a couple of his students. We're going to be talking about the fundamentals of intuitive defensive shooting, as well as the USCCA's DSF fundamentals instructor course. So, Rob, go ahead and break apart those acronyms for us. Let us know what that course is about and what all those letters stand for.
Yeah, there's actually, it's really all the same kind of stuff, right? It's somewhere back in the 1990s. I started moving away from what I'll refer to as the traditional method of defensive firearms training as a student. Some of the people that were influencing me, some of the questions I was asking, some of it was even full circle because even going back into the 80s, I was kind of doing things a little differently, I guess. I wasn't going to a lot of formal schools, didn't have the chance to go to a lot of formal schools. Going into the late 80s, early 90s, doing military training, law enforcement training, certainly picking up on what all the gurus of the day were putting out, the modern technique stuff for the most part. There was some evolution going on in the competition world. And really, by the late 90s, had really broken away from almost everything that I had learned, let's say, by 1993 or 4. And spun my way of thinking about the problem to be more contextually appropriate in terms of just purely defense, not marksmanship, not shooting, certainly not competition performance in a choreographed environment, but what happens when we're looking for applicable skills as opposed to isolated performance. And found some people that were totally into it and supporting it and getting it, and other people that were also doing that. Against one of my mentors in the mid 90s, one of them was a PSD guy teaching at Fort McClellan, and he had come back from Gulf War I with just a different perspective on the way to teach teams to work together for counter ambush, for protective details. And that was really what got the wheels turning. Ran into Tony Blauer at the end of the 2000s and really found out that he was like a decade ahead of where I was, just because he was doing it since the early 90s in the unarmed world, thinking about integrating body's natural reactions and really not sort of the best elbow strike you can throw against a bag or even in a ring, but the way to use your elbow as a striking tool if you needed to in the worst case scenario. And then I always say that I think that happened because I think the whole kind of world shifted in training for a couple of reasons, but two main reasons. I think in the 90s, we really have to see that as a marking point that kind of leaves what they in the 80s, perfect private sector training industry behind. Those two things are ubiquity of surveillance cameras, dash camera footage, and higher quality surveillance camera and security camera footage came into widespread use in the 90s. We started seeing real fights the way they actually happen much more often, going by sort of anecdote or hearsay. Any cop will tell you that eyewitness testimony, especially eyewitness testimony under stress, is horrible in terms of value of evidence, even though it's very compelling to a jury or in a news story. Well, cops fall prey to that same thing, right? We were very quick to listen to our brothers in arms when they tell us what happened in a fight or how they won a fight or how they survived. Same thing for combat vets. But intellectually, we know the truth. Memories aren't formed well there. So having objective data from video cameras really changed everything. That's not the Weaver technique. No one, and that's not a technical isosceles position that you're using in that fight. Yet you're winning. Let's reverse engineer that. The second one was the growth of the Simunitions Company and modern force-on-force training, modern reality-based training that was empowered by Simunitions and its popularity and its adoption. That really changed things because now we could pressure test things in a different way, and we could see actual human performance under stress in an emotionally charged environment without the lethal part of it, right? So if you can't go out and get into a gunfight, you can get really close with well-scripted reality-based training with force-on-force. So those two things, I think, should have changed the entire industry, right? Because we're seeing objective evidence and demonstration in a way that we never were before. And some of us are 20 years further along, and some people are still, shooting El Presidente on the range and worried about their first shot from the holster on the timer. I'm glad to be on the forefront of that performance ladder. And the defensive shooting fundamentals program, the DSF program that I was talking about some tonight, is the latest evolution of that. I told you guys earlier, kind of as far as my company goes, our flagship program for a long time, combat focus shooting program, right? So this is the 2006 version of that book. This is the 2010 version of that book, the book that went with that program and evolved, that expanded version. And this is one of the two books. I'm the one. This is one of the two books in 2018 that we published with the Defensive Shooting Fundamentals program with USCCA. The main difference being these books were full of words and ideas and thoughts, very few pictures. And with the USCCA, we've been able to add a whole bunch of really pretty pictures and cool graphics that explain things better by far for a lot of people than just reading the boring words. So I'm really proud of that collaboration in the program. We've got over 100 instructors certified already in the defensive fundamentals program. They're added sort of in Rob world to the hundreds of other instructors who certified in combat focus shooting going all the way back to 2005.
That's awesome. And so we have Rob, Pope, and then Matt. They're a couple of the DSF instructors. I want to kick it over to Pope. What brought you to that DSF instructor course under USCCA and Rob's tutelage?
I've been an instructor and training counselor with the USCCA for a few years, and we've been looking for something more to bring to my facility, my range, something more defensive. And I've been looking into a number of different aspects of it. I've been looking into Rob's program and stuff for a couple of years. And then when the USCCA dropped on us that they were partnering with him to bring this new program out, I mean, I was on board right from the get-go.
We did. Again.
What about you, Matt? What brought you to this instructor level course?
Pretty much the same thought process. I've been teaching for 20 years or so, and I always felt like there was something missing or something that the standard course curriculum out there wasn't covering. And I found myself saying one thing, kind of like you said, with you tell your students to clean their guns, but you don't do it yourself kind of thing, where I was telling my students, use your front sight, both eyes open, even though traditionally it's, use your front sight and close one eye. So it just didn't match up. And the way that I was shooting was just basically intuitively pushing the gun out, extending the gun out, and squeezing the trigger. And it all lines up, and it's genius how it's come together.
So, Rob, how long? You said you've certified instructors all the way back to 2005. So back in 2004, what brought you on this journey where you wanted to start teaching other instructors how to teach it in something that probably wasn't the way things were traditionally being taught at that time?
Yeah, it actually, I think the big mark for me was 2001. I decided to leave full-time law enforcement work in 2001 to become a full-time teacher, instructor, whatever word you want to throw on it. By then, I knew that I wasn't going to survive the bureaucracy and sort of the politics of local law enforcement. I know I'm not a big believer in seniority as some magic anything, survival in a situation. And there was a conversation I had with a training sergeant. And I was, mind you, this was not my first law enforcement position with this agency. I had been there, I don't know, going on 3 years, I guess. And I was on the SWAT team, did a couple other things that were kind of fun, cool. Had done a bunch of stuff in Tennessee before that was fun, cool stuff. I was writing for SWAT magazine. I was teaching as an adjunct for several different already outside of our jurisdiction. I'd take leave, take my comp time, turn it in, go out and teach. So I'm busy teaching and doing things and been doing for a while. And I kind of had a conversation like, hey, I'll take some time off. I know we're doing quals this week, and I'll staple up some targets. And it's kind of like, no, we got this. You have to be 5 years on this department before you can be an instructor. Okay, I get that. Like, I don't want to come out and teach, just come out and help, whatever. And the conversation kind of went around. Kind of, the guy was sitting in front of some books. I said, there's a book back there. You got a book over there on your shelf, written by so-and-so. Guy was a cop out in California at the time, and obviously we expect his stuff, right? Yeah. Okay. So what if he transferred to Northern Virginia and worked for the city? Would he let him come out and help? Right? He said, yeah, sure. After 5 years. Okay, that kind of put it in perspective. All right, that's where this is going. And I just decided to go ahead and roll the dice on this career. So that was July of 2001. Of course, we know what happened in September of 2001. The whole private sector training industry voted. Director was anxious to see what the private sector was doing. We moved fast, we could turn fast, we could adapt things, test things, experiment things much more easily. After a couple of lucky opportunities or breaks or whatever they were, cracks in the door, I ended up running my own training facility out in Colorado. Moved out there. I was out there first in 2002, moved out there in 2003, and by 2004, we were providing training to special forces teams, pre-deployment counter-ambush classes that really were the culmination of about 5 years of this work towards counter-ambush training, which really integrating natural reactions, thinking about realistic, practical responses, and then training in a way that was experientially beneficial so that people were having to process what I wouldn't have said this now if I didn't know the terminology. People were having to process information concurrently with the execution of their motor skills or the choosing of their tactics, things like that, instead of just doing it in isolation or like an athletic performance. And that came to a head because I was approached by 10th Special Forces. They said they wanted to rent our building. We had a great 360-degree shoot house, multi-floors, all that kind of stuff. And I kind of rolled the dice again. I'm not really in the building renting business. I teach classes. I said, how about this? After this is 4 or 5 hour conversation over a video shooting. I don't know. At some point it was, hey, why don't you send a couple guys over? We were about 4 or 5 hours from where they were based. I said, come over, send a couple guys over that you trust. Let them take this extreme close quarters tactics program, this integrated grappling and shooting stuff that we've been doing since about 2000 formally. And if they don't find any value in that program, cool, I'll rediscuss renting you the building. But if they find value in it, then I'd like to be part of that training that you guys do here or offer the training. They came, they loved it. That was probably late 2003 or early 2004. By late 2004, like I said, we had full companies with Green Berets coming and going. Naval Special Warfare ended up coming out. They sent their instructors from SQT repeatedly. And by 2005, it was actually the SQT instructors under NSW that asked for certification to teach this combat focus shooting program that we were doing there. So it was really a request from them, which was kind of, the whole time I'm going, oh, am I really doing this? Right? But I was. And I had a great team there of guys doing it with me at the Valhalla Training Center. And we had the opportunity to come up with a program, a certification program. But other than that, it all been osmosis and kind of mutual signing off on this or experimenting with that stuff. And this book, the 2006 book, actually got written because I had to put a bunch of stuff in writing for that curriculum for the Navy guys that were coming to get certified. So I wrote it down. I thought, okay, let me flesh it out and publish a book. And that's where that book actually was written from, was that first instructor development. So we started expanding. We did close quarter stuff. We did pistol handling. So we were teaching these programs anyway, and just kind of through osmosis and time, we would certify people. The only formal instructor development that's gone on since 2005 has been in the fundamental defensive training program. That's the only one that's been consistent. Over the years, we've added all kinds of stuff: the rifle program, the family firearm safety seminar, our school attacker response course. We do instructor development in about 4 different areas now. And it's really what I'm passionate about: curriculum development and instructor development.
That's awesome. And here we are about a decade and a half later. Pope, talk to us about what some of the prereqs are for that class, and what gear did you use? What does a student need to bring out with them?
For the instructor development course, to start with, you have to be an instructor for the Concealed Carry and Home Defense Fundamentals course with the USCCA. And as far as gear goes, I mean, you need a good striker-fired pistol, a few mags, holster, and a whole lot of ammo.
That's awesome. What gun did you shoot?
Wait a minute. Wait, are you kidding me right now? That's you're going to set somebody up for failure like that?
You need about 60 hours worth of prerequisite training that you need to do and research and stuff, so you can make sure you're up on the skills and the understanding behind them.
Yeah, there's actually an online distance education prereq before you get to go to the in-person course for the DSF, and we recommend people do a lot more than that. So in our CFS program, they have to attend the end-user course, do some distance education, and that's a 5-day program. That, of course, covers a lot more than just each individual DSF level. But yeah, there is an online prerequisite under the USCCA as well.
Yeah, I had about 60 hours worth of pre-training, reading books, videos, doing that online distant learning, and all that prior to actually showing up and whatnot. I guess I should consider that part of the gear.
So is that a prerequisite there, Pope and Pincus? Do you have kind of assignments for them before you can become an instructor, or is it a test, or how do you determine who will be able to come into this course?
For me, oh, good, Pope. Because from your perspective, specifically on that USCCA program, you're really familiar with that process.
Okay. Prerequisite wise, the online e-learning that they put out, there is a requirement and a test to pass through that. You must pass the test on it with a 90% or better. The e-learning itself takes, I think that probably took me about 10 to 12 hours for the 2 levels. But, a lot of that extra time was going through and reading the books and doing the other research and stuff in order to make sure I grasped the concepts and stuff that were there. Just blowing through the e-learning really isn't going to get you there.
Very true.
So talk to us about that online training. What does that look like from the student's perspective? Matt, is that something that you went through, or can you supplement in-person training or credentials to kind of bypass that online training?
Yeah, definitely. I went through the same training Rob did, and I can say that meticulous notes was something that I found that I relied on heavily, and it's an intense course. It changes the way you have to think about things, and even what comes out of your mouth. So if you can't be a wordsmith like Rob is, like Pincus is, then it's going to be a tough course to pass, much less a tough course to teach.
So on that note, Pincus, what are you teaching in that class? What is a student taking away from that, other than the USCCA and the IC, other than that instructor curriculum? What other skills are students taking away from that class?
To be clear, you're talking about the instructor candidates that are coming through the instructor course or the end user course?
The DSF course. So as an instructor candidate, so what are you So if we look at some other instructor training programs and curriculums out there, it's here's a book. This is what you teach. This is kind of how you teach it. What is that DSF program doing above and beyond that, if anything?
I think there's a lot in that distance education that it's fundamental to, especially when you get to the level 2 stuff. Level 1 stuff, I would say, is more thorough in terms of learning models and teaching models, and actual methodology, the principles that underlie the drills. Each one of our drills kind of has a lecture that goes along with it, or a specific lesson, or a specific concept, or a training philosophy piece to it, right? So our most common practice use drills is called the balance of speed and precision drill. But there's worth of theory and methodology and science behind why the balance of speed and precision drills are run the way they are. But there are limitless variations of how you could run one, depending on what kind of target you've got, range, what kind of skills you're working on, pistol, rifle, single person, multiple person, team environments, home environments, active shooter, you do whatever you want with that concept. So what we're teaching is concepts and principles. In fact, we say with all of our instructor development that the goal of the course isn't to get someone certified. The goal of the course is to increase someone's understanding of the concepts, principles, techniques, methods of the programs, and their ability to communicate it. And that's one of the important things, right? Then we teach them why certain phrases and certain implicit actions on instructors are actually negative to the student experience, or maybe undermine the credibility of the program. And one of the things that I can say has benefited this program greatly is that we were really pressure tested, not just from the standpoint of making students better, but we have been fighting sort of against. And I think that tide has probably turned for at least everybody under the age of 60. I think the tide has turned to the newer methods, more evolved concepts and philosophies and processes. I mean, you gotta remember, when we started doing this and started getting popular on a national level and started getting magazines, TV shows, and all the stuff that we were doing in the 2000s, we would have guys come up to us like, "Whoa, we learned everything we needed to know about close personal combat from Jeff Cooper. Nothing needs to be done since he's done all the work," And it's like, all due respect to Cooper and the guys at Gunsight and what they did to birth the private sector training industry, especially the guys that broke away from Gunsight that continued the evolution. You look at like Ken Hackathorn, Clint Smith, Louis Auerbach, those guys who said, "Okay, we start beyond it." Look at Frontsight; they're still literally teaching from that same book in terms of like dogmatically that was being used in the mid '80s. Before dash camera video, like before the field of neuroscience even really started to develop, we were getting into adult learning and teaching methods until we really even started to understand non-cognitive decision making. For the science of even motor skills, behavioral learning and motor skills environment, kind of what this whole muscle memory thing, what automated responses are, how to tie learned responses to learned stimuli. I mean, that wasn't even in the vernacular, right? So what our program is doing is starting to dive into that information for the instructors. So it's not just how do you pull a trigger. How do you pull a trigger in the middle of a gunfight? You hit, you pull it. So you may be slapping at it, you may be smacking it, you may be pressing it. The terminology there doesn't really matter, but the nuance of what is important about defensive shooting really is very different from what's important about shooting bottle caps at 50 yards type marksmanship shooting. And it's funny, if I listen to guys from that era, if I listen to the 80s and 90s era instructors, everything I hear them say, a lot of these guys are friends of mine and have been and are mentors to me. When they say conceptually, here's what you need to worry about, here's what's important, here's what you need to be thinking about it, I'm like, yes, perfect, awesome. And that inspired me to look for those things back then. The problem is sometimes when I look and see what they're teaching on the range in 2018, it no longer represents those philosophical concepts of practical, realistic, contextually appropriate, all those things. It definitely fit our best guesses as a community in 1995. We know way more than we did then. That's the kind of stuff we're trying to teach at the instructor development and why behind the drills. We're not teaching these guys how to shoot. Quite frankly, I don't care. To cut my arms off, put me in a Stephen Hawking chair, and I'll teach you how to shoot with computer boys. I don't need to be able to shoot. What I need is, I need to understand human decision making, human motor skills. So that's what we're trying to teach.
Hey, so Rob, you mentioned the shooting part of it. What's the qualification look like for this course for the instructors?
It means they have a command of the knowledge, and they have a and they have an ability to communicate it well. There's no shooting requirement because I don't care about their shooting. They can now, inherent in the program, to be able to teach certain drills, they have to be able to demonstrate certain skills. So there's the physical components, which are graded by the senior instructors and by the training counselor level, is what they use, the terminology they use in USCCA program. In our program, just call it the senior instructor, the master instructor, the instructor development guy. Those people are evaluating someone's ability. So, for example, one of the things somebody has to be able to do is reload, right? Like when we demonstrate, we're not going to, and this is obviously it's a surface, so it's not going to cycle. But when we demonstrate the reload, it's not like, okay, guys, check this out. I'm going to reload. Watch how fast I am. Bang, reload, bang. Look at the timer. That's how fast I reload. Like that. I don't know what good that does, except to impress the student if he wanted to be a fanboy. What I need to do is be able to turn towards the students or have them stand off to the side of me and watch everything like in super slow motion, right? So we have to we shoot, we'll get slide lock, the gun will come back in. As the gun comes back in, we turn our attention to the students. The magazine comes out. As we get back to our ready position, we find our magazine, we bring it up, we're still talking to the students, grab the slide behind the ejection port, rack the slide, and either continue to assess the environment or drive back out and shoot. Well, I've done that like 6 billion times. You try to get someone to talk their way through a slow motion reload without looking at the gun in their pure evaluation instructor environment with the instructor development guy watching them, and they fall apart. You can't do that. If all you can do is turn your back on the students and reload real fast, I don't care, right? You need to demonstrate the nuances of the thumb movement. Somebody's going to say, well, my thumb doesn't quite reach on the glove. Okay, so you're going to shift. Watch this knuckle. You're going to shift your hand back a little bit. Your thumb's going to go a little bit forward, and that's going to allow you to reach that button. These are the things we need to be able to demonstrate. So these are the physical skills I'm concerned about. I don't care about them passing, some arbitrary. One of the things that we do is people give this value to these objective tests. They're not objective in the sense that they're like ordained from some like magic reality that you have to abide by. The fast drill, the time that was set by Todd Louis Green was set because that's what he wanted to do, what he could do it in, or what a certain percentage of students would do it in to earn a coin. El Presidente times, when in 1985, when I started looking at El Presidente, when I still thought it mattered, at that time, the times that people were impressed by were way longer than we're impressed by now. It's all subjective, right? The fall course at the police department, you have to get everybody qualified. So what's a score that we know we can get everybody through? They can keep working, but it's going to challenge them a little bit. And it's going to sound good on paper and sound good in court. Whereas the SWAT team qual, well, now we can weed some people out, right? One of the biggest kind of epiphany moments for me was being able to do instructor development for a police department, large police department in the UK. So 3,000 officers, but only 300 or 400 of them had guns. So their instructor, I was doing instructor development for their instructors, but their firearms program could fail people. Right? Like in the U.S., we just don't fire people for not being able to shoot. We figure it out. They get remedial training, or they go off on a certain range, and they come back and magically they pass the ball all of a sudden because we don't fire them. We invested so much in unions and all that fairness and everything else that goes on. In the UK, if you want to carry a gun, your shooting has to be actually at a higher level than the average guy in the U.S. because you are sort of on the SWAT team over there. But these things are all important for bureaucracies and for competitions, and we know who gets back. Qualification courses inside of a structured learning environment really, for a motivated student, they're either going to frustrate you or they're going to not challenge you. So we don't do it. Long answer to we don't do quals, but you have to understand why.
That makes sense. Mike, getting back to you for the end user student perspective on this, you took the fundamentals of intuitive defensive shooting. What was your biggest takeaway from that class? The class that the DSF instructors will essentially be teaching the USCCA students. What was your biggest takeaway from that course?
It's a lot of hard work. Getting to put everything together under any kind of stress is it takes a lot of practice.
I think we might have lost you there at the end, Mike. It's a lot of practice. What would you describe your level of proficiency with the handgun prior to taking the fundamentals of intuitive defensive shooting course, Mike? What would you think that was? Or how would you?
I'd taken a couple of classes. I would say probably averaged like just above beginner, but nowhere near like highly proficient.
So for a new student, maybe they've taken some classes, maybe they haven't. Who do you think this course is for? Who should take this class?
Anybody that hasn't taken it, because what the process was from my perspective was we went through some basics, and then the problems that I had were diagnosed and then corrected, and we worked on improving the basic fundamentals of it. Grip, stance, you know.
What does that class look like? And Matt, let's kick it over to you. What, as an instructor that's teaching the DSF class, what does it look like for a student?
I'd say that it's going to be intuitive. Use the words Rob crafted here. I'd say it's intuitive in the way that things are natural, which is why I'm clinging to it, because it's phenomenal. It's the same shooting, just fine tuned. So it's not new shooting, same old shooting, just fine tuned. Rob's gone through, and his team's gone through at ICE, have gone through the way that defensive critical incident, dynamic critical incidents have happened, looked through the videos and found ways that people respond and match that up with the best, most efficient and effective way to run your gun so that you can survive a deadly critical incident. So I think for students, it's going to be the quickest, easiest way for them to get that gun into play and possibly save their life. And I agree with Mike in the sense that it's good for anybody. I mean, I've got military from the 90s, law enforcement. I'm a law enforcement instructor, and there's stuff that just makes sense. I mean, there's very little that I question in the sense of putting this course together and being able to take it and then now teaching it next month.
What are some of the biggest differences between the DSF and then the fundamentals of intuitive defensive shooting program with some training that you might have received in your law enforcement career before, or some training that you currently see LE guys taking?
I'd probably say shooting on the move is one. I preach all the time in my civilian classes that law enforcement miss 80% of their shots. So if you're going to be shooting, we say high center mass in the DSF course, but if you're shooting a cardiovascular triangle is the other thought process with the law enforcement and military, and you're missing 80% of your shots, then how effective are you going to be or efficient are you going to be when somebody's moving or you're shooting at a headshot, a smaller target, etc. I'd say that, and then reloads. I think those two things stand out right away, is shooting on the move and then reloads, tactical reload, combat reload, etc. I think those two are probably those, and then maybe stance. Weaver stance is pressed hard in law enforcement training. That Weaver stance is what you got to do, belate yourself, etc. And I think that kind of goes out the window. Obviously, the empirical evidence from the videos that they scoured through ICE, the ICE team at ICE and Rob had scoured through, just shows that you're going to be moving. It's going to be a dynamic situation.
So Matthew, are you saying that I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. Are you saying that they're teaching law enforcement Weaver?
Yeah, up here in New York they are, but then again,
Okay,
we're in New York.
I just want to clear this up for our listeners. Is that specific to New York, or are and Rob, Pincus, you can speak to this a little bit better because you actually do train law enforcement officers like across the country. I know that you come to my neck of the woods quite often. I live in Durango, and you're over in Silverton quite often. So I just want to clear it up for our listeners. Is it specific to your department, or is that something that is actually being taught to law enforcement?
Oh, I've seen it across the state from other instructors. I've never taught it, but honestly, I came out of the academy. When I came out of the academy, that's what they taught us in the academy was Weaver. And I just naturally switched over to isosceles because it was a natural neutral position. And, on top of that, there's a study that just came out about a year or so ago that after reviewing the videos of dynamic critical incidents, any law enforcement officer said they shot Weaver would end up shooting isosceles or some hodgepodge of that when the crap hit the fan. So,
okay, thanks for clearing that up.
Yeah, I think we see Weaver too. So here in Albuquerque, Jeremy and I, we did a concealed carry course we had a lady who was in the future police academy. She was working on her degrees, and she came in, was standing, and we were practicing draw, and she was in the Weaver too. And I asked her, I said, do they teach you in Weaver in the police academy? And she's like, yeah, that's the only thing that they teach. So we're like, oh, okay.
At least they're not teaching cup and saucer anymore.
There might be somebody out there somewhere still teaching that, because
I'll tell you, I just did an HR 218 class, and somebody actually, the way they taught the corrections officers in New York State to clear their gun, they literally looked down the barrel. They looked down the muzzle of the gun to verify it's clear.
if only there was a safety rule that covered that.
One of the problems I think is that far too often what I see is the formal teaching of stance. Fortunately, I've done a couple of videos about stance doesn't matter. One of the problems is, one of the takeaways that I hear instructors teach from stance doesn't matter is go stand however you want. And what guys, especially when it comes to qual course, I mean, how many courses through the decades have ended with some kind of a final exercise or a shoot off where the instructor actually says, I don't care how you do it, all that matters is your score. Well, I mean, way to undermine the entire last day or two you just trained them, buddy. I care how you do it, because guess what? You can get a better score on a qual course shooting in a way that's very, very different from the way you're probably going to end up shooting in that dash camera. I think that's one of the things Matt was talking about, is that you can, this has been, I've been saying this forever, like, you know, you got to think about it. When you first start seeing a lot of dash camera videos in the late 90s, almost all of those guys would have had time, if they have experience in law enforcement, in the Weaver position, shooting double taps, you know, doing all those things. And what you end up seeing is not that at all, right? So a couple things. It's not just the reverse engineering the videos, but you look at competition shooters. Well, obviously competition shooters in the action shooting sports got away from Weaver, you know, 2 decades, more than that, 3 decades ago. So even the formal isosceles position isn't embracing this concept of stance doesn't matter, right? So we talk about natural and neutral. As long as your shoulders are in front of your hips, your knees are bent, and your feet are kind of about shoulder width apart, and you're not overly blading in one direction or another, you're there, you're natural and neutral. So we, through the movement, that lateral movement to position that Matt was talking about, through a lot of the active nature of a lot of the drills, people's feet end up in a lot of different positions. And of course, by the time we get to our advanced pistol handling, third day of training in sequence, people are lying on the ground, people are sitting in chairs, people are lying on their back, lying on their side, those kinds of things. So we kind of try to get away from this idea of here's how you must stand, and we think about the principles. I want you weight forward at the shoulders, and I want you knees bent, and I want your feet not overly staggered, and certainly not staggered so that your strong foot is always back, which sort of harkens to that Weaver or modified Weaver situation. And then the problem, again, I think one of the problems is the instructors who will say, I don't care how you shoot it, just pass the qual. Well, now you're letting people get a preference, and most people are going to prefer, especially, you know, those who learned that way originally in an NRA basic pistol class or something like that, they're going to prefer a target shooting stance instead of a kind of a natural neutral. It's more fatiguing. Todd Jarrett has a running joke anytime he sees me on the range, like, oh, Rob, you got to relax, bro. You know, like, North Carolina. And he's right. I don't look relaxed because I'm practicing for, like, someone going to kill my family. I'm probably not going to be relaxed in that 3 seconds. I'm not practicing for a match that's going to last all day.
Yeah, it's part of that whole mindset deal. You mentioned day 3 there, Pincus, on your course. So how many days is the course altogether? Well,
the DSF program is 1 day. Now, again, we're talking about the end user. DSF level 1 is 1 day. DSF level 2 is a second day. The course that Mike took, the intuitive defense course, is a 1 or 2 day version. There's versions that are suited to 1 day or 2 days. Fundamentally, I like for that course to be a 2-day course. When we do it in 1 day, you get about 80% of the information conveyed, but you obviously don't get nearly as much repetition. I really like people to kind of go home, decompress, come back the next day. Lets us spread the fire hose of the information out. So that's really what the DSF program is. So you can imagine how many people I've got inside of like Rob World instructor group that are just like, wait a minute, I was certified at Gander Mountain as a dynamic focus shooting guy. I went through your DFC course, so I can teach the home defense fundamentals course, and I can teach CFS, which was CFS, which is now IDS, and now you've got this new DSF. And it's all kind of, if you're starting today, you're a DSF guy. If you started 10 years ago, you're probably a CFS guy, and it doesn't matter that much, except in the advertising or in these conversations. Fundamentally, what we've done is we've just learned more, right? We've refined our approach. I've experimented a lot in the last year with what this BSF program now is in my own classes. Like the class that Mike went through is much more like BSF than the way I structured my courses, let's say 2 or 3 years ago. And the instructor has to be willing to evolve, right? So one of the things I say is like, a lesson plan survives first contact with the student. In the same way a battle plan survives first contact with the enemy, you have to be willing to give the students what they need in the amount of time you have, and work on the things that they need work on. Maybe not even what they want, but what they need. So the DSF program, I think, does a much better job of breaking down, what should a one-day course look like if you're only going to take a one-day course, with still a 10 to 15% fudge factor for the instructors to be able to accommodate specific venues, whether the students, their level, the questions, they're geared more towards a home defense group in New York or Massachusetts or California, or is it more towards a concealed carry group in Arizona or Colorado or Kentucky? So there is some creativity that's still around. I don't mean like they make it up. There's still some subjectivity available to the instructor to teach the course the way they need to teach. We even have different drills in each block. There are mandatory drills for learning and teaching. There are drills that are really for skill development and practice. And there's other drills that are kind of asterisk drills. We call them remedial. If your group is generally having a hard time with this aspect of defensive shooting, then do this drill. If they're having if you have a half hour left, you got to pick one drill or the other from that pile. You pick the one that your students need the most. So DSF level 1 is one day that's more structured. DSF level 2 is another day that's more structured. And our advanced pistol handling class is a 2-day program also. So the plan is that USCCA over the next year, we will develop DSF level 3 and level 4, and that'll be the 3rd and the 4th day. And that'll start to bring in the unorthodox shooting positions, maybe some extended distance shooting. We'll really focus on inducing malfunctions, not just teaching people how to clear malfunctions, but actually inducing malfunctions. The reason we don't teach that in the first couple of days is because we don't encourage people to bring, to count on gear that is likely to fail them. And if they can't get through the first 2 days of training without a lot of malfunctions, then that's our response to them isn't, oh, you need to get better at clearing malfunctions. It's you need to get better.
Yep. So I'm going to ask a question for Matthew and Pope, starting with you, Matthew, and then you can follow up, Pope. What was your most challenging part of the course?
Rewiring myself.
There you go, Matt.
I'd say wording, rewiring myself. I've been shooting since I was a kid, hunting and pushing deer as a kid. Then the military and law enforcement and NRA, and just being able to get that the words correct, the surgical wording, so that way I was able to articulate it correctly in the way that they wanted it articulated. And I think that it makes sense in the sense of the words they picked are more to the point, and they encapsulate what they're looking for a lot more. I think that probably was the hardest, and to be honest, probably the hardest for many people. If you came there knowing how to shoot, then that wasn't as much of an issue. And if you came there a little rusty on shooting and you had to do the words, I think that was a big struggle for some. But the wording was probably surgical wording, right, Rob?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to say the hardest thing and stuff about the weekend that I went for the instructor course was the weather, but honestly, it was getting that deeper understanding of the curriculum and making sense of it and being able to convey that information back out and stuff. I mean, it wasn't just about understanding or knowing the drills or knowing the curriculum. It was knowing the mindset behind it and being able to convey that information.
Totally agree.
That's awesome. I want to, before we get too much further past, we have a couple listener questions. Steven says that his statement, many law enforcement agencies or academies in Michigan are still teaching Weaver, so apparently that's still going on. And then we have a question over on Facebook talking about front sight focus and where's the focus? Is it on the front sight or is it on the threat? Because he's heard both, as we all probably have. So where should our focus be, and where is it likely going to be?
Well, we know at the beginning it has to be on the threat, right? So we talk about efficiency, right? ICE, integrity, consistency, efficiency. So efficiency is the starting point. We kind of go backwards in our acronym for the program, all of our skills, techniques, whatever. So I realize I need to identify the threat. That's step one, right? So I see the threat. Now I reach for my gun wherever it is. I'm going to bring my gun to my eye line, drive the gun out to the threat. I'm still looking at the threat. If I were looking at my front sight, it wouldn't make any sense. One of the ways we see this on the range, talk about the difference between range training and real world. Have you ever seen that guy on the range who's behind a barricade and he like drives the gun out, puts it in front of his face, and then he rolls out and shoots, right? Or the guy with the rifle, he brings the rifle up. He's already looking at that red dot, and then he rolls out and shoots. That's ridiculous, right? If I'm doing home defense, I'm not rolling out with my finger on the trigger, looking at a red dot or looking at the front sight. I'm looking to see if it's my kid or the bad guy as I'm moving towards my kid or moving to the barricade area. Police officer, right? I mean, it's SWAT guy. You're still looking around before you're looking at the gun. Same thing. Personal defense, even more so. Oh, I drive the gun out. Now, at this point, if I need to use my sights, that's when I'm going to use my sights. I've got about 40 minutes of this. We took 20 minutes each, 2 videos from the instructor development course a few years ago and put it on my YouTube channel, getting into the idea of intuitive sighted fire. So there is no always look at the threat, always look at your sights. Of course, you have to be looking at the target first. You learn to bring the gun to your eye line, and then add extension. If you perceive, this is that balance of speed and precision idea. If you perceive that you need your sights, and in fact, the way we actually articulate it is, surgical language, Matt, is if you aren't confident that you can get the hit without your sights, use your sights. That's what we say in the training environment. So in the training environment, we say we don't want you shooting with hope. We don't want you pulling the trigger and hoping you get the hit. We want you shooting with expectation. Now, that goes all the way to in the real world. Obviously, if you don't believe you can get the hit, don't fire your gun. You know, if you got a bad guy on the other side of the food court at the mall with 300 people around and have a gun, it doesn't mean you definitely pull the trigger. You've got your Ruger LCP coming out of your wallet holster or something, and you're trying to shoot a 300-yard, 100-yard shot in a crowd of 300 people. You're probably endangering people other than the bad guy, right? So if you're not Jerry Mitchell, like, don't take that shot. Well, somewhere between that Jerry Mitchell shot and the guy who's on top of me, I can't even get my gun to a shooting position, and I have to use a retention shooting. I'm obviously not sights here, right? So if the guy's right here, like, the wall's about 10 feet away, if I'm going to shoot him, I don't need my sights. I'm looking at him. The gun's in my line of sight, extended. I'm not hip shooting. I'm not partially extended. I'm not looking over the gun. Right, I'm here. Now, if the guy grabs a hostage, I close an eye, right, and I shoot. So, but nothing fundamentally physically changes. All that changes is if I don't feel confident in shooting without my sights, I close an eye and look at the sights. And I go as far as to say to students, if you're even thinking about your sights in that moment, when your gun's driving out, you're wondering, do you need your sights or not? Stop thinking about it, close an eye and use your sights. Because if you're already cognitively engaged in, should I use my sights, or I think I might just stop having a question about it and use your sights. But I don't want students thinking they need their sights to hit a target, a chest size target at 10 feet, because nobody does. You have to be physically disabled to need to hit, need sights to hit a target. And I've had guys with shakes, with Parkinson's, post-stroke, tremors, that have had to use visual reference or constant double vision, who have to close an eye, who have to use visual reference to steady the gun. Those are literally physically disabled or physically challenged people, as opposed to normal human beings. So there is a time when you don't need them. There's a time when you do need them. Practice is how you figure that out.
Nice. I think that answered Pickle's question. I think that's a fake name that he uses. It's one of those agency guys, probably. Pope, you were an USCCA training counselor and instructor. So you've probably, I don't want to make an assumption here, but you've probably taught a few students. What has this level of training done for you or for your student? What do you think this brings your students at the end of the day?
I honestly think this is going to bring a lot better understanding of the defensive use of a firearm, not just shooting and just the basic proficiencies and stuff. This is actually going to, I know we're redoing the curriculum here that we offer at our facility based around the information and the things that I learned in this class. It's going to really bring a lot better understanding of that. Whereas before we were mainly, teaching the fundamentals and the understanding of, trigger press and grip and that type of stuff, but actually putting it into context and looking at, okay, what really happens in a defensive situation and stuff when you're under that type of stress, and how to apply these skills and stuff in order to make your make yourself safer.
Yes, I love it. Mike, through the fundamentals of intuitive defensive shooting class, if you could go back, what is one thing that you would tell yourself a day before that class to better prepare you for it, if anything?
It took me about a half an hour to accept that a lot of what I had learned was obsolete. I thought I had an idea of what to do, and then as my brain caught up to reality, I realized, no, I'm doing everything wrong. I need to start over. And once I hit that, it just worked a lot better.
Oh, excuse me. So Rob, from the perspective of a guy who teaches other instructors how to become instructors, what are some of these notions that instructors are still holding on to that are really doing a disservice to their students?
That the range performance is somehow linearly connected to the application of the skills that you're using on the range in the real world. I liken it to imagine that I talk a lot about driving and shooting because kind of everybody drives, at least in the US, almost everybody drives every day. And they have a lot of experiential driving skill development, behavioral skill development with driving because it's an applied skill set. But imagine you spent however many years you've been driving, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, however many years you've been driving, you spend all of those years and all that time just driving in a cone full of parking lots, or a parking lot full of cones, with an instructor sitting there next to you with a checkboard, kind of evaluating you with your hands at 10 and 2, putting the turn signal on 275 feet before the cone where you're going to turn, knowing the route, knowing what each of the test problems were going to be, having 10 miles an hour per car length between you and the next car, like all that technical driving, right? You get really good at taking that driving test. You get really good at performing inside of that parking lot full of cones. And now the first time you ever have to actually drive your car, it's like 11:30 at night on the other side of the city in a snowstorm as the big football game or concert's letting out, and you've got a screaming, bleeding to death family member in the back seat. You've got to get them to the emergency room.
Yeah.
Right? And analogies like that hopefully kind of bring this idea home that I try to convey, is that the range is a racetrack. And way too many instructors refuse to accept that. They refuse to not push their students to like some ridiculous potential environment where, it's the typical thing, like I alluded to it earlier, is that quick draw thing, right? Where somebody's got the gun in their holster and they're standing there like this, or standing there with their hand over the thing or whatever, and there's a buzzer and they, bam. That's 2 out of 3. Bang! Right? And it's like, look, 0.78. Now, anybody who says it's better to bring the gun up and drive out than to swing the gun up from your holster, they don't know what they're talking about. Because if I bring my gun up and turn it, it takes me for 0.2 seconds to get my gun on target. That's crazy. That's a 20% increase in time. But when are you standing in like the food court like this, like looking at everybody as if they're a potential threat, and then somebody says, okay, get ready because the guy in the blue jersey is going to go for it. So as soon as he reaches for his gun, you're allowed to go. Ready? Bam! Bam! Right? Like that doesn't happen. So you get really good at this skill, right? You get really good at El Presidente. You get really good at 2 to the body, 1 to the head. But if you're not evaluating what the 2 to the body did, and if they did their job, you don't need the head. And in fact, now the guy's going down and you're bringing your gun up, bang, bang, swing over here, bang, bang. Well, that's great, except what are you swinging at? Because if you're really doing defensive training, you don't know what's going on over there. You're shooting this guy until he's done, and then you see the threat, and then you drive out. Well, that's always going to be slower, right, than shooting and swinging. When we tell people in our class, when we talk about potential and multiple targets, you drive out here and shoot, and then you come back in and you assess, you learn something about somebody on the range, an actual human being, you collect information, then you snap your focus back to the second target and shoot. Well, time that, right? How do you time that? Well, you can't. I talked earlier about why qualification courses are made up, right? We tell people to shoot 3 to 5 shots or 4 to 6 shots as their default response to the human chest, right? So if I'm driving out and firing 4 shots and you drive out and fire 3 shots of that rep, how can we compare times, right? So we always have to shoot 3 if we're doing this timed drill. So I think it's timers distract everybody. You end up doing things that are completely inappropriate trying to chase time, like that, like this whole debate that's going on online. A lot I've seen it recently where, bring the gun from here to here this way. I mean, I actually show people on the range, if you're bringing your gun out of your holster, your gun's ever here, I don't know what you're practicing for, because there's nothing, unless you're standing on a roof shooting people down in the courtyard, right? Because if I got to bring the gun to my eye line, and if the guy's out in front of me, I want this gun pointed. By the way, this is my retention shooting position, right? So if I'm bringing the gun and pushing it forward and somebody's on top of me, now I'm banging into them this way instead of shooting them that way. So coming up, turning, and driving out is infinitely more appropriate and efficient. And by the way, it teaches the principle of bringing the gun to your eye line. So if the threat's over there, I come up and turn this way, right? I don't want to punch out here and swing around. So the fastest draw type stuff, the fastest multiple target engagement, all this clone drill, all the evaluation and isolation, the call courses, that's the biggest problem in the industry today. There was a magazine article, I forget if it was Ballistic or it was Recoil. They asked, 15 instructors, and some of them were not instructors, some of them were competition guys, media guys, but they asked 15 gun industry people, what they thought the biggest problem today that what they need to get rid of in the industry. And I said timers. And of course I was lambasted. Is that guy crazy? Why would we get rid of timers? Especially, the guys that are more into competition shooting. Well, I did a great video with Rob Latham, world's most accomplished gun shooter ever, where we talked about why the timer kind of lost. It's our world's collide has lost the timer. And it's interesting to hear his perspective on it in the context of defensive training. So I think that's the biggest problem the instructors have.
On that note, Worlds Collide, are you guys going to have a simunition off? Are you guys going to, put each other's skills to the test in a reality-based scenario?
It's funny so that's the whole problem, right? Like somebody thinks that would matter, right? It'd be fun. It'd be funny. We would have fun with it, but somebody actually thinks that's a real thing, that somehow going into an equal initiative, mutual combat environment proves who's a better shooter, like who's better, whose theory is right. Like I would never claim that anything I'm doing would prepare somebody for like a duel with airsoft or with simunitions. So what's funny is so for example, he did the figure 8 drill, and we kind of showed how what he normally does falls apart and breaks down. You actually see like world's greatest handgun competition shooter for the last 3 decades miss the A zone, like come off the target because he's kind of trying to process information. He finally figures out where the target is. He starts shooting. He swings and shoots false swings like 12 feet away and has shots, go side left. He overswings. Then I do. He puts me in competition stages. There's a couple of the Worlds Collide videos where I go into a competition stage and it's just like, okay, you go, and he runs the stage, and I don't watch him run it, and he gets his time, and then okay, Rob, go, and I run the competition stage, and it's like 7 minutes of difference of time, right? Like by the time you take the points down, like what I do is not designed to win USPSA stages. What Rob does isn't what he usually does, and what you usually see him doing has nothing to do with defensive contextual application, and that's what the Worlds Collide is about. Really, has been about just. We fundamentally agree on like grip. We fundamentally agree on where the gun should be, how important trigger press is. We fundamentally agree on gear selection, holsters, things like that when it comes to defensive shooting. I stopped paying attention to competition shooting in like '98, right? Like I won a couple plaques and moved on. That's his thing, right? Breaking down stages and the strategy and all that. So what we're hoping to do, actually, I actually had a conversation with Springfield Armory's media side, promotion marketing side this morning, with my PDN team, because we're getting ready to do a lot of taping this fall. And Latham and I have been texting back and forth all morning. I think we're going to be doing some taping either in September or October this year for another group of Worlds Collide videos. And what I'm hoping to do is like I'm going to get more into Rob's world and do more stuff on the competition side. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to find that incredibly entertaining.
This is a completely selfish question, but it goes to that point with reality-based scenario training. It's still even in that. So what are we doing, or how can an instructor set up that reality-based scenario training to induce as much stress while trying to limit the amount of gaming that the victim, right? If I'm taking a simunition course, I still know going into that knowing that there's going to be some level of threat. So how, because I know this is something that you've talked about and that you've worked with some other companies on developing, what should a student look for with regards to that? Yeah. That'll be my last question, I think.
So reality-based training, it's a whole nother thing. Like that's a whole nother, we do a 2 or 3 day instructor development program on reality-based training. First of all, some of the term now, I am very close with the Reality-Based Training Association, which primarily focuses on civilian law enforcement curriculum development and skill development using force-on-force techniques and reality-based training in general. What we've done is taken a lot of the stuff from training at the speed of life and the things that Ken has developed there and put them into practice in the civilian world for a couple of decades. Formally, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago now, I was asked to develop a curriculum for the instructor certification for the round that became the round that is trademarked, the name Force on Force, that's sold by Spear, Federal Spear, that conglomerate under ATK. They bought that out from the company that developed it, Tech. And my team developed the instructor development program for that. I've been using munitions forever and air munitions and UTM. We were using UTM at Valhalla back in the mid-2000s because munition wouldn't officially allow people to train civilians with it. So all the industry entities that were doing it, they were using munitions kind of outside of their agreement, and I refused to do that at Valhalla, so we used UTM from back in the day. All of the stuff's evolved. They are all letting civilians use it now officially. They all have programs that vary in efficacy, I think, from like just here's how to do it safely, here's the rules, versus really teaching scenario development. And that's what is happening with the book Training at the Speed of Life. I'd recommend anybody that wants to end the thing are going to do force-on-force scenarios, because it's very, very, very hard to script them well. And it's all about scripting. You're taking people into an emotional environment, and the instructors, the facilitators, the role players, everybody has to really know what they're doing. They have to be in control. There's safety protocols. It's not easy. I'm horrified by most of what I see, on the YouTube, and most of what I see with the marketing cartridges. Airsoft, I see airsoft used in some of the same ways. Airsoft, you can reduce some of the safety protocols and concerns, but a lot of them are still there. We use a lot of airsoft. We use a lot of SIRT pistol. I use the SIRT pistol on our extreme close quarters tactics course. We used to run that course kind of like you see other people doing it, like a big ego, macho, kind of testosterone fest of guys grappling and wrestling and over guns in contact distances with some protective gear on. Our course, I think, has matured a lot. We don't do it quite that way. We were doing it that way when the SF guys fell in love with it and NSW started contracting with us. But we've evolved, I think, past that, and a big part of that has been the associated with reality-based training. So the hardest part is, as you say, not letting it just be two guys brawling in suits or Spartan gear or high gear suits, and not just letting it be, paint balls with house guys. I'm not using scenarios to teach. I'm using scenarios to evaluate someone's ability to apply their skills, their decision making, their timing, when do they go for the guns. We might, as a scenario, say, okay, go into this convenience store, go to the back of the convenience store, pick up a bottle of water, use a dollar bill, come back from the convenience store. You'll see a role player will be over there at a table. That's the clerk. Put the thing down. He'll ask you for the money, give him the money, pick the thing back up, and then walk out. And if anything interesting should happen, respond appropriately based on the training. If you have any questions. So there's your briefing. Now, I know what's going to happen in there. The role players all know what's going to happen in there. There might be a couple of if-thens, right? Like if the guy puts his back to the wall and moves into the room like that, he walks in like Wyatt Earp with his hand over his gun. There's different things that might cause branching, but for the most part, we know what's going to happen. When the student goes in that room, literally to them, especially if they aren't sort of gaming it in the sense that they've done it a whole bunch of times, it's anything could happen, right? You have ninjas could come out of the ceilings, there could be dogs, there could be a robot dog, there could be ISIS could be in there, the clerk could try to rob you, the clerk could have somebody hiding under the table, holding them hostage. I mean, it's like their mind's going crazy, right? So that's one way we set it up, is we just kind of leave a lot of open-endedness around it, say go. When courses are more specific, let's say there's a course like, it's an extreme close quarters tactics course, they know somebody is going to wrestle them and try to get with their gun, and it's going to be one of our, enroll coaching instructor role players. And then we have to really distract them, right? So I can't tell you how many videos I've got of, military guys in the holidays sort of moving around with their hand just kind of like hovering over the holster, or, guys in environments like go moving through with it with their long guns, knowing it's in extreme close quarters, then really slowing down or stepping up before they go around a corner or deep corner. Whereas if you watched them the day before when we were doing sim runs with targets at distance, not the force on force stuff, they would have blown around that corner much more quickly. But now they kind of know what's coming. What we have to do is distract them. They know it's going to be extreme close quarters. Anytime you get close to a role player wearing protective gear, that you can see them like bucking up for the fight, ready to stomp, throw elbows, and do all that. So we'll fire a blank gun or something over there, and you see their body language. Even the guys who had their hands hovering over the gun, getting ready to draw, they go, oh, and then they go back to the gun, and you can see almost in their body language just mad because you fooled them. And while they're driving out to shoot the guy with the blank gun or whatever across the room, guess what happens? Spider Monkey, the guy who was close quarters, grabs him, and now the extreme close quarters fight is on. And people are like, well, you ruined that one. No, I didn't, because we'll do something else when you come through the second time or the third time. So we get really crafty and creative with creating natural reactions, even if that reaction is a separate stimulus than what you were focused on learning. And then whatever you were focused on learning comes up in the scenario, so we can really evaluate how well you did that in an actual distracted ambush situation.
Love it. So last question for everybody, and let's kick it off with Mike. Mike, I want you to one piece of advice for new instructors.
Wow. What I was impressed with was the way that the class I took, Rob diagnosed people's individual problems quickly, and I'm thinking that was much more important than being kind and making sure it was a pleasant afternoon at the range. Just getting in there and tearing apart what needed to get torn apart, and then put it back together, of course.
Love it. Matt, what about you? Best piece of advice for new instructors? You're muted, Matt. I think on your end you're muted.
You hear me now?
There you go.
There it is.
I'd say be open-minded. Just have an open mind to the curriculum. Try to take it all in. Make sure that you're not automatically putting up that gate like, oh, this is what I've learned for all these years. That can't be wrong. And it's not so much that it's wrong. It's just there's a better way to do it. And be open-minded. And
Pope, over to you. What advice do you have for new instructors?
Those that are looking to get into the DSF instructor program, I highly recommend do your homework ahead of time. Get a deeper understanding and stuff of the curriculum and of the material, and why we're teaching it the way why they want us to teach it this way and stuff. And if you have those questions, take those questions to the class with you. Ask the whys. Get an understanding of it. Make sure you know it on a deep level, not just on the surface of, okay, this is how it's done. So.
And over to you, Pincus. What is one piece of advice that you would give to new instructors?
I think the most important thing is to understand why you're teaching what you're teaching. So if you've taught other things before, you need to have a really good sense of why, because what's going to happen is you're going to say, well, here's how I teach it. Nobody's going to care why what you teach. We're going to care why you teach it. So if you say, well, here's how I teach reloads. Okay, chances are we've seen that before. Now, one of the things I always say is, if you show up with a better idea, cool. But we're only going to know it's a better idea if we say why. Because guess what? We've seen this one before. Okay, so we've seen that one. We ruled it out. So if you say, well, I teach it this way, okay, we're going to ask you why. If you say, well, I saw some Navy SEALs doing it, okay, great. See, not helping. If you say, because I can watch the gun and the bad guy at the same time, then we can have an intellectual discussion about the principle that you believe that technique is founded on, or why you think it's a positive. And hopefully at the end of that discussion, we always say, I don't care if the whole agree to disagree. That is like cop out, weakness, another tool for your toolbox. That's an instructor who's scared to be accountable for actually explaining what he teaches. What we need to do as instructors is understand the technique. So if a guy says, I teach reloads this way, okay, tell me why. Once I understand it, now I can start to talk about, okay, well, we don't do it that way because you may not, maybe you're misunderstanding human vision. Maybe you're misunderstanding cognitive processing. Maybe you put way too much faith in what you think is watching the target in the gun, because the target is a piece of steel and you know exactly where it is and it's always going to be there, right? You can disassemble your gun, send it off to the Cerakote, put it in piece of steel is still there. So we have those kinds of conversations. So an instructor that comes in, yes, obviously all the things they said, I mean, it goes without saying, right? You got to read the books again, take the class, maybe train with other instructors who are teaching the program. But really, if you come in, and we've had guys do it. We had guys quit. We've had 3 people quit the last course. Like, all right, like, I'm not going to go running through the parking lot to chase you down if you can't even, especially you can't confront the instructors and say, here's what I don't like about this. You're not going to teach it well anyway. If I teach it this way because the department tells me I have to. Nope, we don't do that either, right? If you say Rob says as an instructor, like, I'm not there, and your students are like, why do you read those way? Well, Rob says, no, like, you better figure out why you're teaching it in my program too, and it better not be because Rob says. Right? You have to understand those principles and concepts that underlie the methods and the techniques. So that's how we're going to have a great discussion. That's how we're going to come to an understanding, and that's how we're going to have really dedicated guys like Rob and Matt who are excited about teaching this program. And I believe that's because they understand it. I don't think it's because it liked it or it worked well for them. A lot of our instructors, I mean, hell, you watch me shoot with Lathan once in a while. You'll see a little weaver creep in there because I did it for decades before I figured out that was a bad practice, right? So I don't, again, it comes because one of the questions was, what about the qualification course? Well, again, the instructor at the end of my 2-day course may realize he's got a lot of work to go back and reevaluate what he personally has been doing. Maybe reevaluate what kind of gear he's been recommending, what kind of gear he has, right? So if he's got to do all that work, what do I care how well he shoots? He's probably going to be a better shooter in my terms than 3 years anyway.
That's awesome. I think we could be on here for another couple hours easily with everything that you have going on and that you've been working on. But I think we're going to wrap it up there. Definitely appreciate everybody jumping on. Shoot an email over to show@afteractionproject.com with some other instructors that you'd like to see. Definitely love to get Rob and some of these other instructors on here. Pope and Matt, if you guys ever wanted to come on and review one of your courses, we'd love to have you. And then for our listeners, feel free to jump over to patreon.com/afteractionproject and support us if you would so choose to do so. Remember that it's your life, it's your safety and protection, it's your responsibility. Thanks for jumping on, everybody.